Chapter 22, The Weight of the Crown. The future king watched the Lady Morgana sleep in Gaius's chambers before scrutinizing the girl, Elund, or Aeled, or whatever name she had chosen, and felt a prickle of something profound. He was on his feet at the door as the Saxon carried Morgana, and he thought over his plan, one of misdirection, of the vacancy. No Saxon fugitive here. For Elund, her mother being a Briton and born in Camelot, was Cymric. But, of course, that wouldn't cut it. Gaius had to be convinced of the plan. But, after he had thought about it, the old healer knew there was no other way. He just had to keep Elund with him, and Arthur and Merlin would do the rest. Do it quickly, Gaius urged, pressing a phial of purple nightshade and mandrake, a concoction designed to induce a state of suspended animation so profound it mimicked the finality of the grave. You will tell her, Gaius, Arthur hoped. But the healer shook his head. No, he told the prince, not I. For where would the weight of argument come otherwise if she were not, to all eyes, dead? But Elund was decidedly compliant about the whole thing and waited next to the dream-troubled Morgana for the signal to take the draft. A mistake. Truly, the one mistake Elund had ever taken. But, she made the choice and would feign death. No rare flower needed to bring me back? She asked if Gaius, who was preparing the liquor. The substance simmered over a bright candle. Gaius turned his head slowly, and shook it. You could flee, he suggested. Arthur will not tolerate a servant who brings trouble. And go where? Elund asked. I have no family in Camelot now. The king of the Saxon lands wishes my presence and my death, and Odin is not a forgiving king. My only hope might be Joyous-Gard, but I have no means to reach my brother. She shrugged. Anonymity in Camelot is the best I can hope for. And to be in the sphere of Prince Arthur, her mind told her, an added benefit. And so the torches in the courtyard were lit in odd numbers, and Elund drank the draught of living death, which was not as bad tasting as she expected it to be. Before long, she was unconscious and the world around her controlled her fate. 88,888,888. Her shroud was prepared. Or, more correctly, Merlin was tasked with making it, weighted with old iron and stones, to be committed to the dark waters of the lake under the watchful, grieving eyes of the citadel. The name Elund would be gone with her body. So too would exist argument with no weight that could be held by the mercenaries. Mind her arm, Merlin, she's not really dead, scolded Gaius as they wrapped the cloth around her. He placed her hands together as if holding a sword, and then placed that of Lancelot's, which he had given to Elund, the sword proud against her chest. She looks like a Saxon warrior, Merlin told Gaius. Well, she is one, Gaius confirmed, and an excellent one at that. It's a pity she caught the plague and succumbed. At this, Merlin scampered back, looking at Elund's immobile form with mistrust. Gaius, who was in the process of lifting Elund up, stopped and narrowed his eyes. Not really, Merlin, we are only pretending, of course. Merlin looked between Elund's corpse and Gaius, then shook his head. Yes, right, he replied. Then, Merlin and Gaius carried Elund down the steps and across the courtyard. Halfway across, and Gaius sagged, his advancing years yielding to the effort. Across the courtyard, the knights, who were attending, saw Gaius stumble, heard Merlin cry out. Who is within? Asked Sir Leon. And Merlin told him, and showed them her face. It is indeed a sad day, Sir Percival told them. Such bravery he wrought the sword in Gualod. A girl, wondered Sir Gawain, searching Elund's features as the knights carried her towards the kitchens. Beyond was the middens, and through, without the walls of Camelot, was where the plague victims were buried. But it was Arthur who met them at the kitchen gates. With one brief look at her white-blue features, he beckoned they carry her with care up to the great hall. Once this is over, Arthur counselled, as Elund absorbed the plan, remain as Morgana's guard, anonymous, nondescript, answering to Sir Hector. And Elund had agreed to lose her name and any thought of life that she had had before now, of Guilod and of Rati. Before the knights could get to the door of the king's hall, there were raised voices, and raised fists. The green and yellow of neighboring Mercia was protesting the wait. Captain Edmund at the fore. "We have already waited," he protested as Sir Hector asked them to bide a little longer. Sir Hector caught the eye of Arthur, who was leading the knights carrying Elund, then stepped aside, the doors swinging open. The dozen mercenaries then strode in, Edmund acknowledging Sir Hector's gesture, and he bowed to King Arthur Pendragon. "You demand a meeting, Captain, through might and will." "Not how Bayard approached Camelot the last time." "King Arthur," Edmund began, "we are here under entirely different circumstances. One who is a fugitive from Mercia is hidden, I do believe, in your kingdom." "Oh?" Arthur asked. "And do you have a name?" "We do," Edmund told the king. "She is wanted by her father, for breaking the terms of her exile." Arthur looked at Captain Edmund of Rati and then at his son. "The prince has told you we have no fugitive here working as a guard a broken bar." Arthur frowned. "I think we would know a broken bar, you said. She captain of the Saxons a broken bar. I think we would know if a female guard was amongst us, a Saxon at that." "Yes, Arthur." Prince Arthur stepped forward, gesturing the knights who were carrying Elund. "One female Saxon we did find here has succumbed to a fever," he went on, "and we were about to bury her with care outside the city walls. We had an outbreak in the summertide, and even now deaths are occurring. It was common enough practice to bury plague victims away from cities." Edmund nodded. "In fact, our physician may not have noticed she was Saxon had she not come to him for help. Hers is very distinctive hair, although she does possess a fine Britain-made sword." "Stolen, presumably." At this, Arthur lowered his hand, which made Percival and Leon lower with reverence Elund's immobile form. "Would you recognize the fugitive?" Edmund nodded, not taking his eyes from the small parcel that contained a body on the way to burial. He looked inside and saw her face, white with blue mottling. "I am so sorry," Gaius said, looking at Edmund's shocked expression. "I gather you knew her?" Edmund looked at Elund and then glanced at Gaius for a second, giving him a brief nod. Then, he turned back to the king. "King Arthur, I will leave you to bury the princess as per precautions. Know you had with you a woman of unalloyed bravery and pure honor." He clicked his heels and saluted. "King Bayard will mourn her passing. King Bayard should have kept better watch over his children, if as you say, the woman was royal." He narrowed his eyes. "If, as you say, she was sought by him." As Edmund led his guard back through the hall, looking at Elund's cold, dead face, Arthur stepped into his path. "Her seeks," he told Edmund, pushing the blade of the weapon that gave the Saxons their name, towards him. "Lord Prince, she did not steal her long sword," Edmund continued. "It was given to her by her cousin, a Briton. I ask she is buried with it, as is our custom." "Agreed," Arthur told Edmund. "May you convey our most profound sorrow to King Bayard." And the king broke off and held up a hand. Through the open doorway of the hall a figure raced. Dressed in the customary russet brown of a scholar, he neither bothered with an appropriate greeting for the king, nor yet even seemed to care that anyone else was present. Aneurin stopped when he saw the body in its shroud. Time seemed to stand still, seemed to not pass as Elund's friend fell to his knees and began to weep. His grief seemed to fill the hall until there was nothing but the passing of a girl who had been a mercenary, part Briton, part Saxon nobility. At length, Arthur took some steps to the young man and bent to him, whispering the promise of rest for his friend, and helping him to his feet by means of support to his elbow. Aneurin's cries subdued at last, and he followed Percival and Leon out of the hall. Almost, for something occurred to Edmund as Aneurin retreated and he hurried to catch him up. "Hold, boy, I know you." Aneurin turned, and looked back to Edmund, then nodded. "I was in your king's service for a time. I came back with Elund from Camelot after King Arthur granted King Bayard's servants free movement. She was, my friend." And then he bowed his head, and turned again. But Edmund was not convinced, and turned back to Arthur. "A pretty show," he told the king of Camelot, scathingly. "I sense a trick." "You believe this is a trick?" Arthur repeated, anger rising in him. "Go, wretched Saxon, back to your master. If that woman was your king's daughter, then we are sorry for his loss. But do not doubt good Britons, for they are all welcome in Camelot, to work, to live and, like that poor boy, to grieve. The ire in Arthur's voice did not brook argument. Edmund called his guards to him, and left the hall without a word. 88,888,888. When Elune had been taken to the mortuary, and a guard placed upon her body, Arthur returned to his father and sat beside him. Was all we witnessed this evening true, Arthur? Asked Arthur. Indeed, father. You were kind enough to offer her shelter when she saved my life against the wyvern, and that was her? Arthur interrupted. The Saxon we made into Morgana's guard. Arthur nodded. Then I am sorry she is gone. 88,888,888. But the lie did not last long, and Elphice, put in charge overnight of his comrade's body, had the shock of his life when Aeled began to stir in her shroud and ask for water. Enarin, who was also keeping watch, was also stunned by Aeled's reawakening, and went to her, before sending Elphice off to Gaius, who had been expecting the summons, although it was a little earlier than his predicted time of dawn. He woke Merlin, and they brought honey and rose water, and barred her from sight as she dressed in clothing Merlin had summoned Elphice to get from the guard stores, until she was in uniform, and conscious enough to make it to her feet and back to Gaius's tower. It was unfortunate, then, that Arthur had chosen that moment to pay his respects to Elune before her burial, and had stormed out of the mortuary in search of his son. So it was a trick. He thundered. Of course, Bayard would have put her to death. And she is better off with us being useful to Morgana. Bring her to me. Arthur demanded. She is, Arthur began. Don't lie, that was for our enemy neighbors. This girl, a warrior, he told his father. A threat, Arthur declared. Working inside Camelot, known to King Bayard's captain, and to be taken back to their kingdom and killed. She had been sent from Bayard and had had to survive as a mercenary. Arthur said nothing for a moment, and then leaned back, surveying his son. You know a lot about it, he observed. I thanked her for saving my life at Gwalod. She didn't have to. She could have carried on being a mercenary for King Odin, and I could have been dead. Bring her. But Gaius had told Arthur that under no circumstances could Elune go to Arthur until the next day. Arthur had not liked that, but had listened, and at dawn the day after, Hector had been sent to fetch her. It's a lot like getting out of a very deep sleep, Elune told Merlin when he asked her what the living death had felt like. I feel very thirsty, but otherwise all right. And had reached out a hand and taken that of Enarin's, who felt honor bound to accompany Elune and explain to the king that he had indeed taken her for being dead. You do not shrink in the presence of royalty, Arthur told her, as she stood shoulder to shoulder beside Arthur. Are we not all equal, as Camelot's laws do say? Elune asked. In return, you are the daughter of King Bayard of Rati? Arthur asked. One of them, so he believes, Elune replied. And yet my son knows you died of the plague and his servant has buried you. So you cannot stay here, father. Arthur took steps towards Arthur, but the king held up a hand. Unless you throw all that is Saxon away and be a whole-hearted Briton, and anonymous servant in my household as I gifted to you when you put my son's life ahead of your own, proving you are no mere mercenary. Elune smiled. Of course she was happy to throw all that was Saxon away. To remain in Camelot would be truly something. Your name, child? Arthur asked. Aeled. Aeled of Gwalod. Well, Aeled of Gwalod, do you accept the reappointment I am making that you guard my ward? Elune nodded. Yes, sire, she told him. For I am more ease of heart that you tend my ward that you are not, that is to say, you will not find me lacking, sire, Aeled promised. Arthur looked over her form, an idea, formless in his mind, beginning to build. No indeed not. Next week we are to have a tournament for Arthur's coming of age. I expect you bright and beside my ward as we celebrate. He smiled, brightly. Do you think you can do that? Yes, sire, Aeled promised. Yes, I can indeed.